What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Bunch of fun stuff to talk about today, including, well, it's around that time of year where the Call of Duty rumors start up, and, well, they're starting up, maybe a little earlier than usual. Then we have a few things to talk about around Capcom actually laying people off because they have to start trimming the fat around some of their underperforming IPs. Now, before we get started, I want to say thanks to everyone who's been subscribing. We are pretty much right there at 80,000 subscribers, so if you have not subscribed yet, consider subscribing as we make our way to that 80,000 and then eventually, hopefully, 100,000 at some point. But today, guys, let's get started. We're just going to jump right into the Call of Duty rumors that have been circulating around the internet yesterday, and it's sort of pointing to Call of Duty Black Ops 4. Now, this isn't a surprise since Treyarch does work usually with the Black Ops series, and I mean, we're up to Black Ops 3, and Activsion and their partners like to play things safe most of the time. I mean, look how long it took them to go back to World War II. They needed Battlefield to really get them there first. Now, I'm sure it was planned out beforehand, but still, they like to play it safe. In this case, though, Black Ops 4 is probably one of the safest things they can do, so it at least makes sense, right? Now, we saw this on Twitter from Marcus Sellers saying, COD 2018 is Black Ops 4 and is coming to PS4, Xbox, PC, Switch. It is set in the modern times and is boots on the ground. The Switch version will support DLC, HD Rumble, and motion controls. The Switch version is also being ported by a company which is familiar with COD games. As for that company, a lot of people have been trying to speculate. Some are thinking it's Ravensoft. But we did hear about Beenox doing something, again, another rumor, about Beenox working on some sort of Call of Duty game last year for the Switch. There were a lot of people talking about this. And Call of Duty games generally are in production and development for 2.5, 3 years most times. They have 3 different companies that have at least enough time to work on their games. This is the sequel. 3 years is plenty of time for them to work on, in this case, Black Ops 4. So it's very possible that this rumored game we heard about last year from Beenox for Call of Duty, if it's completely true, they could have been working on Black Ops instead. Considering where Call of Duty World War II's development cycle was, it might have been pretty hard to squeeze out a Switch port. In this case, though, I don't think there's much reason that the next Call of Duty, even if it's not Black Ops 4, wouldn't be coming to the Switch, because they've had plenty of time to port it and move it over, especially if they're working with a different company that's pretty much responsible for the port job. They would have had well over a year to make this happen. Now, whether you agree with Marcus Sellers or follow him or believe him, it's still very interesting to look at what should be a release for the Switch. Now, of course, everyone knows it's going to the PS4, it's going to the Xbox One, it's going to the PC. It will also have some sort of X and Pro support for the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, of course. But to see it move to the Switch will make it very interesting, because the closest game that we had to a full Call of Duty in handheld mode or handheld portable mode would have been something along the lines of the Vita version of Call of Duty, and that didn't go over as well. A lot of people didn't really like it, but it was still as close as we've ever been to Call of Duty on the go. Now, Call of Duty on the go is interesting because most people play the multiplayer. Once you leave your house, you kind of lose the ability of multiplayer. So I'm not really sure how many people will play it on the go unless you have access to a good Wi-Fi spot. Maybe, I guess you're at work and you can play on your lunch break, I guess. But here's the thing. The one thing I'll say about Activision is they go where the money is. This is a company that had no issues taking a Call of Duty game and putting it on the DS. The DS, guys. This is a very weak system, but they managed to put Call of Duty on there. Whether you liked it or not, doesn't matter. They still put it there because the install base was high enough and the interest was probably there for some people. They also took things like Black Ops and put it on the, well, at the time, archaic Wii. Obviously it's archaic now, but even at the time, severely underpowered system. I mean, it equated to a slightly more powerful original Xbox, and they moved a 360 PS3 game that was kind of pushing that technology at the time, downgraded and put it on the Wii, and that worked well. So it's interesting to see this. I don't think the performance of the system itself would hinder their porting to it. I just think they needed more time, and I think they need, in this case, probably an install base larger than 10, 12, 13 million. They're willing to put it on the Vita, so, but in this case, I think the pieces all fit into place for this. Black Ops makes a ton of sense just because it's safe, it's easy, and they can easily work in microtransactions there, no problem. So Black Ops makes a ton of sense. Already has a following, it's a powerful seller just by its name alone, and the Switch is at least to the point where the development cycle is long enough, and of course, it has a big enough install base to do that by probably this, I assume, winter time. We'll probably see easy 20 million out of it, maybe more. So yeah, everything makes sense here. And of course, the big thing I saw that kind of put me off, I was like, well, they're not going to want to work with the online for the phone, but we don't really know what the online for Nintendo is that's debuting in September. It could be completely revamped, and maybe that's something that at this point Activision knows about and wants to work with. Probably a better online that's not dependent on your cell phone with voice chat maybe through it. There's a lot of things that Nintendo needs to get right with this online, and I do think Call of Duty to a degree kind of depends on where Nintendo goes with their online. So we'll see. We'll see. The rumors started up in last March, I think, when we started hearing about WW2. So if more stuff is going to show up, we should start seeing it in the next month or so, and then probably some kind of announcement at E3. And it'll be fun to see if it does make it to the Switch. People were surprised last year about Call of Duty. Made sense to me just because there wasn't enough time. There's enough time for this Black Ops game. So if it doesn't come to the Switch, I'll be curious what in this case what their excuse will be for it. Next up, let's talk a bit about Brawl Out, because it is getting a physical release. Something I like to see, as I've told you guys before, is when indie games go from being digital to physical, because it used to be, well, back in the day, physical games eventually become digital. This was a long time ago, but it's cool to see this, where a game that is, again, smaller, sells enough digitally, and then it makes sense to publish it and put it out physically for people who like to collect and put stuff on their wall. You don't just have to have an empty case. You can actually have something in there. Now, I also talked to the Brawl Out developers. In this case, I put on Twitter, asked them, will that patch that fixed the stuttering, the online issues, and a lot of fixes that we saw in gameplay that it needed, 1.1.0 will be included on the cartridge. And of course, any updates following that, you can just download at the time of popping the cartridge in. But the big one that people complained about will just be included already on that cartridge, so you won't worry about the frame stuttering that we had before, the online issues, things like that. It looks like they are partnering with Angry Mob Games to get this out, and this is going to be May of 2018, so not too much longer. You'll be able to walk into the store, pick it up physically. Should be fun to see any extra little things included. We'll have a manual, stuff like that. Should be fun. Next up, we have to talk about Mr. Koizumi from Mario talking about Toad. Now, if you don't know, one of the strangest and biggest debates, I guess, was about Toad from Super Mario. It's a character we've known forever. Now, the big debate is the mushroom on his head, is that a hat or is that part of his head? It's been ongoing for a long time. Believe it or not, this is something that people argue about a lot online. Well, in this case, in a video where they asked them a bunch of questions, things about like, what's the relationship between Mario and Peach and everyone, and they even asked him, is that a part of his head or is that a hat? And Mr. Koizumi said, listen, it's part of his head. It's not a hat. And people were, of course, all over the place about this, back and forth, making memes everywhere too. But that's right. It's part of his head. It's not a hat, despite them showing it being his hat in the Mario animated TV series. So there you go. I guess that animated TV series is absolutely not canon, I guess, since, well, according to him, it's absolutely part of his head. But people are still arguing about it to this day, despite him weighing. And he also said something interesting about maybe something's in there or something. It's weird. I don't know, but check the video out. I'll leave it down in the description if you want to see for yourself, where people behind the entire project of Mario say, yes, that is part of his head. It's not a hat. Next up, let's talk about Sega teasing yet another PC port. We saw this with Bayonetta, where they were teasing in achievements of other games. Remember the little 8-bit Bayonetta they had? They had achievements that were kind of pointing to a Bayonetta port. That comes over. And then, of course, we saw achievements in that game that then pointed to Vanquish coming over. And now we have achievements that are built into Bayonetta and Vanquish that seem to be pointing to Puyo Puyo Tetris coming to the PC. Here's one of the achievements here that people have pointed out, and then you'll see a straight up Tetris block next to that under the Vanquish achievements, just under the achievement Z. So this is really cool because that means that, well, Steam is going to be getting what I think is an awesome puzzle game. I mean, it's Tetris and Puyo Puyo Tetris together, and it's a lot of fun. It's more fun online when you play against other people. In this case, a very large audience that I think will enjoy this game will be getting it, and it shows Sega's, really their initiative to bring a lot of games, any games they really can within reason, to the PC platform. They must be finding success with Bayonetta, Vanquish, and I guess at this point, Puyo Puyo Tetris is also coming. No actual announcement at this point, but I really can't see it being much longer. because once we saw these achievements show up in Bayonetta, and in this case for Vanquish in Bayonetta, and then the 8-bit Bayonetta, they showed up a few weeks later, and we definitely got announcements sooner than that too, or at least a mystery website. So I would expect Sega to address this now that people have found those achievements, kind of put everything together. Really, in the next week or two, we should see them saying, hey, you know, Puyo Puyo Tetris showing up on Steam, you know, in a week or two. So it'd be cool when it does pop up. In our last bit of news, let's talk about Capcom kind of doing some layoffs here, mostly because of the underperformance of Dead Rising. Now, we all know Dead Rising. It's been around for a while. I remember playing this in the early days of the 360, and I just thought it was this really cool experience. But according to Kotaku, from Jason Schreier, where he wrote this entire article, good article, go read it, it's in the description, he talks about Capcom having to back off of this franchise a bit because it is underwhelming with its sales figures. I mean, I don't even think it cracked 1 million units on the Xbox One, which is really hard to believe. I remember they talked about it for the longest time as in the hundreds of thousands of sales, but not 1 million. And if you look on a lot of sales charts, it's not quite there yet. I do think maybe with digital sales, digital numbers, it has to be there by now. And then, of course, it released on the PS4. But it looks like it's still not enough to keep the roughly 250 people employed and for them to really put more of a risk on the next one. Now, according to Jason, who spoke to a source who wants to remain anonymous, obviously, when you start talking about inner workings of your position, you can get in some trouble, fired, even sometimes lawsuits based on NDAs. But in this case, they said that 50 people were laid off. They're reorganizing the entire structure of how they build these games over there in Vancouver for Capcom, and in this case it mostly has to do with the next Dead Rising, which they think was overscoped at this point, and of course, according to Jason, was understaffed like usual, but in this case, the scope was too large, and they were going to put too much money into a game that maybe just doesn't have a good return, so they cut about 50 people, and they're looking to restructure the next Dead Rising to make it smaller in scope. So it's not going to be this massively scoped game. Now, the previous one, I remember a lot of people complained about that same thing where they didn't think the scope was big enough, so it sounds like the next one coming up is going to be even a bit smaller, which, alright, listen, if the game itself needs an open world or it's not going to sell, to me that makes me wonder how good the gameplay actually is in this case. People want bigger games, they're AAA games, but my question is, does Dead Rising actually have to be a AAA game? Because I kind of look at Dead Rising in the same way I look at something like Hellblade, where it's just not this big blockbuster hit that it was back maybe on the 360. It's kind of fallen off a bit. So listen, if the expenses need to be really managed and you got to shrink the game a bit, you have to shrink the game a bit. Work on the gameplay, work on some of the story if you need to, but just get the fundamentals right and then build off of that, because it's very clear they were doing something wrong that the fans did not like. So let me know, guys, down in the comments, if you were a fan of Dead Rising and it's kind of fallen off a bit, what don't you like about how Dead Rising has become? Because it seems like people don't really buy into it anymore. And I'm not really sure myself why, because I kind of felt out of Dead Rising after the second one. I really didn't get into the third one or even the fourth one, but I'm curious why you guys who may be fans of the series don't really like it as much now. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for Newswave today. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit the like button. Really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave a bunch of comments down below about everything we talked about. Let me know your opinion on Call of Duty Black Ops 4, I guess, on the Switch, on the Xbox One, on the PS4. A lot of people are big fans of Call of Duty, and even if you don't think your particular system, whether it's the Switch or other systems, need it, I know a lot of people on PC are like, we don't need Black Ops or Call of Duty. It's important. There are people who buy 1, 2, 3 games a year, maybe Call of Duty, maybe Madden, and maybe they even wait for Battlefield. But in this case, it is good for the casual market, because that's kind of what Call of Duty has kind of, in this case, catered towards, or is the casual market. Let me know where you fall on this. Do you think it makes sense for it to be Black Ops 4 just because it's safe? Or do you think this entire report is wrong and it's going to be something crazy and kind of blow the doors off of our expectations? I'm really curious where you fall on that. And then, of course, let me know what you think about Capcom having to lay people off for the Dead Rising from the studio, in particular in Vancouver. You think it's a good move to kind of rein back expenses, try to maybe start over from the fundamentals and work its way back up, because this studio is best known for the second, third, and fourth installments, but not for the first one. So they've taken over since the second, and maybe they do need to kind of go back to square one and work on this. They don't need a big game, they need to just get the stuff right. Let me know what you guys think down below, though. I'm very curious. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.